Hello, viewers across South Asia, the Middle East and beyond. Welcome to Redline Global's launch program. This is being broadcast simultaneously from Pakistan and Lebanon in collaboration with South Era Network. We are covering the world's most important developments, which are directly impacting the lives of billions of people across the world. Conflict and wars in the last 12 months have already killed more than 72,000 people in Gaza. Around 3,000 have been killed in Lebanon, more than 4,000 in Iran. These conflicts have displaced in Gaza alone 1.6 million people, Lebanon combined. At least 1,400 people in Pakistan alone have been killed in terrorism-related incidents in the last 9 months. In terms of dollars cost, the conflict has already touched a sky-high figure, nearly $1 trillion. I'm reminding for you that there should be more costs coming your way. We need to understand how the new world disorder is working or not working, what lies ahead based on what we're facing today. From the May war between India and Pakistan and the Kashmir conflict, to Afghanistan's troubled land, to the quagmire of the Gulf, we will cover all, offering you insights of some of the world's most well-informed experts and analysts. We will start with the India-Pakistan war last May and assess its impact. Through my studio, I'm connected with Washington and in Islamabad. We have two guest panelists whose introduction I will give to you. Laurie Watkins, who's the ex-US President Advisor, Truman Project author, public policy expert. She has served as a presidential appointee at the US Department of Defense during the administration of Barack Obama. Welcome, Laurie. We also have Asif Ali Durrani, former diplomat, former special representative on Afghanistan, former Pakistan's ambassador to the UAE and Iran. We also hope to get connected with, in Romania, Dr. Flavis Gaba-Maria, President, Middle East Political and Economic Institute, Bucharest, Romania. As I told you that we are in collaboration with our friends in Lebanon. Let me toss the transmission to our Lebanon correspondent and our colleague and our host, Sahil, who has his own panel of experts offering great insights. So Sahil, before I start my debate here, over to you.
Thank you so much, Talat. Salam alaikum, Pakistan. Namaste, India, Hindustan. And namaskar, Bangladesh. And good evening from here in Beirut to everyone joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Sahil Murli Meghani, and this is South Era Network. The dust from last year's events has settled. But what it has revealed is a landscape that few predicted. And frankly, nobody fully understands yet. Tonight, with SAMAA Global, with Talat there in Lahore and I here in Beirut for SEN, we look at how these events reshape not just the subcontinent, but the wider region. And we ask the harder question, where does the world go from here? Like everything in life, to understand the disorder, you have to start with the spark. Last year, India and Pakistan fought a 4-day military conflict. I remember seeing those fighter jets in real time flying all across when I was reporting on the conflict from the ground, from Punjab, from Jammu and Kashmir. For 4 straight days, no one slept. I remember hiding in a makeshift bunker in Kashmir's Srinagar along with locals and spending a night there with no food, no water, no electricity. Residents of both Pakistan as well as residents of India spent those 4 nights exactly like how the residents of Gulf nations spent their entire March and April during the ongoing crisis between the US and Iran, in fear, in anticipation, and in hope that it would end soon. 4 days that shook the region, rattled global capitals, and ended with both nations claiming they had won. 2 countries, 1 conflict, 2 very different stories. Regional tensions between India and Pakistan escalated sharply following the April 2022 Pahalgam attack. By May 6, Pakistan's military had been placed on high alert. Around midnight on May 7, India launched missile strikes targeting areas in Punjab and Kashmir. In response, Pakistan initiated Operation Bunyanam Marsoos in the early hours of May 10. Later that day, both countries announced a ceasefire, bringing the military escalation to a halt. But this was not the first time these 2 nations have gone to war. my colleague Leticia Castro traces a history that goes back to the very moment both of these countries were born. Take a look.
India and Pakistan have spent decades stuck in a cycle of war, ceasefires, border clashes, and nuclear standoffs. But this story didn't start with modern airstrikes. It started with a map. And the way two borders were drawn changed everything in 1947 and ignited a rivalry that still shapes South Asia today. In 1947, Britain withdrew from the Indian subcontinent and divided it into two sovereign states, Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan. But the partition was chaotic. Millions of people were suddenly on the wrong side of the new borders. As Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs fled in both directions, communal violence erupted and claimed up to 1 million lives. At the heart of the chaos was Kashmir. Kashmir was a Muslim-majority princely state ruled by a Hindu Maharaja. While Pakistan expected it to join them, the Maharaja hesitated. When armed tribal fighters from Pakistan entered the region, the Maharaja sought military help from India, signing the instrument of accession to join the Indian Union. That triggered the First Indo-Pakistan War. After 14 months of fighting, the United Nations brokered a ceasefire in 1949, leaving Kashmir split by a ceasefire line. It remains one of the most militarized borders on Earth. By 1965, both sides thought they could shift the balance, featuring the largest tank battle since World War II. But after weeks of fighting, neither side won decisively. Both sides accepted a UN-mandated ceasefire, eventually signing the Tashkent Declaration to restore the status quo. The Third War wasn't fought over Kashmir, but over East Pakistan, the region that we know today as Bangladesh. After a political crisis and a brutal military crackdown, millions of refugees fled into India. India backed the Bangladeshi independence movement, and war broke out in December of 1971. In 1999, just 1 year after both countries declared themselves as nuclear powers, fighting erupted again in Kargil. But the message was clear. This rivalry had entered a new, more dangerous era. But Kargil also marked something else. The era of full-scale wars was fading, but the conflict itself wasn't going anywhere. Instead, the tensions evolved. After Kargil, India and Pakistan entered a more dangerous kind of standoff, one defined by militant attacks, border skirmishes, airstrikes, and constant escalation risks. The era of full-scale conventional war has since evolved into a gray zone of high-stakes standoffs. In 2016, following an attack on an Indian base in Uri that killed 90 soldiers, India announced surgical strikes across the line of control. In 2019, after a suicide bombing in Pulwama killed 40 Indian personnel, India launched airstrikes in Balakot, deep inside Pakistan. Pakistan retaliated with its own air operations, resulting in a dogfight and the capture and subsequent release of an Indian pilot. And the tensions flared again in 2025 after a deadly attack in Pahalgam. India launched Operation Sindoor. Pakistan responded with heavy retaliatory fire across the border, proving that even small-scale incidents can bring the region to the brink of catastrophe. With India and Pakistan, their history isn't really history. The wars of 1947, 1965, 1971, and 1999 still echo through every new crisis. Kashmir remains divided, the border remains heavily armed, and every new attack risks reopening decades of trauma. And that's what makes this conflict so complicated. It's not just about land, it's about identity, religion, generational trauma, politics, and a partition that never fully healed. 79 years later, the border remains a fault line, and the story remains unfinished.
Excellent report there, Leticia. Thank you so much for that. We now go to Lahore, where we are joined by our guest. Over to you, Talab.
Thank you very much, Sahil. This is most insightful. Let me dive deep into the debate with our experts, Laurie Watkins and Asif Ali Durrani. Thank you very much for with us. Let me start with you, Laurie. With this background that we showed on screen, how do you compare the past with the present? What happened in the last May? How is that different in terms of impact, in terms of its ramifications from whatever has been happening between India and Pakistan in the last many decades?
Hello, Tala. Thank you for having me in your program. Greetings to your viewers there in Pakistan. So what happened last year, I think, was a very pivotal point between the two countries for sure. But what has happened since that time for Pakistan, as the way it has really, launched itself into a completely different stratosphere than India as far as its global recognition to allies and even adversaries, seeing this come up from Pakistan has been quite remarkable, led, of course, by its military chief field marshal, Asim Munir, General Munir there. Things have changed drastically as far as the position that Pakistan now sees themselves in, not just as a mediator between countries, including the United States, for major peace negotiations and deals happening in the region, and to be trusted with that extremely important role, but also to keep peace within its own backyard, this long border that it has with Afghanistan, as well as with India. I mean, this is, in my opinion, was a game changer for the two relations between the two countries. I think it put India back on its heels, realizing the might of Pakistan and its military. And I hope that there can continue to be some sort of peace, because we already have enough tensions going on in the world. We don't need any more right now.
Absolutely. If wishes were horses, diplomats will certainly fly. Let me go to Asif Ali Durrani. Durrani Sahab, thank you very much for being with us. Laurie has described this to be a pivotal moment in South Asian history. And very interestingly, she has also linked whatever has happened since to the conflict between India and Pakistan. Obviously, you will have a perspective that is tilted towards Pakistan. But I still want to hear from you, are the two events connected, really, the war and what Pakistan's role is today?
Thank you, Talat, for having me. With regard to India, Pakistan, at the moment, unfortunately, there is no war, no peace situation which is prevailing. And there's a background to it. Noreen has very rightly explained it. So has your earlier report. India actually underestimated Pakistan, unfortunately, because they thought that they will make Pakistan, quote unquote, irrelevant. It was frequently, this mantra was repeated at every forum. However, and at the same time, then India also took the misadventure against Pakistan last year. And then that was adequately responded by Pakistan. And more than that, actually it was the narrative which India tried to build against Pakistan, but it backfired. The reason was that Pakistan displayed complete transparency in the matter, especially with regard to Pahalgam incident, which was unfortunate, and Pakistan offered impartial inquiry in the matter, which India refused. And this was, in fact, noticed by the international community, especially the media. So when you look at the 4-day spat between Pakistan and India, you will find that from the Pakistani side, everything was open, transparent, and we displayed whatever was available, whether on the screen or on the ground. But Indians, they kept mum, and they thought that by sending their verbose parliamentary team.
So sorry to cut in. So what you're saying here essentially is, in summary form, what you're saying is that there was misreading of capabilities and overestimation of how Pakistan could be dealt with. Let's look at it from another angle. And let me welcome Dr. Flavis to the show. Dr. Flavis, we have seen a tendency shown by states to not negotiate. And it seems to be escalating to the war ladder very quickly. You have seen that happen in Europe. You have seen that happen in the Middle East. And now we are also witnessing it between India and Pakistan, most recently in last 1 year. Do you think that there's a new methodology at work under which negotiations come after the wars and conflicts have been fought?
Yeah, the methodology of the negotiation after the conflict, yes, this is very influenced by the manner and the conflict was conducted, and the parts that has an upper hand in both conflict and also Middle East conflict currently, but also in your conflict, what we can say, there is a very new battleground. And this means this was considered your conflict. It was considered the first drone war between the two countries. I would like to say drone wars. That was a sky war. This is the most relevant one between the two countries, accompanied by the cyber attack and significant naval maneuvers. So, and also currently the asymmetry of conducting the war, it's also very relevant in what's happening in Gulf region. All of this, the asymmetric capability and the manner that each side has the capacity to react very in the short notice, they influence the negotiations on the table. And also it's very relevant the part who is going to conduct the mediation, who is engaged. In your case, US engaged a lot in order to de-escalate and to reach a conclusion in a very short period of time. That is a little bit differently. That is what's happening currently in the Middle East, where the complex of the issue is very entangled on the history. And the distrust between two parts is a high, but it's a very, very huge. But what is the difference? The difference is the type of military capability of both sides, US and of course Israel. Both sides has a huge military capability and much nicely and advanced technology than Iran. In your case, I would like to say, you show actually last year that you had capability in order to win a war that even though your size as a military is lesser than your India, and India is, as we know, is as a large capability, but you had this kind of strength in order to succeed in the war. So in your war, it's a little bit different. Your capacity is almost closer to each other's in your conflict. In comparison with the other.
This is a very interesting point that you make. Let me take this point to Laurie. Laurie, in Iran and Israel case, or in Iran and US case, there's an asymmetric warfare. Also, the model can be taken to Europe, like Ukraine versus Russia. But in case of Pakistan, despite the difference of size between Pakistan and India, the results have been astoundingly different. Is it capability? Is it capability plus intention, or both combined, a new doctrine that you're looking at?
I think a lot has to do with intention, Talib, because you have to put forth a budget. You have to have the will of not just the citizens and the people of Pakistan, who I believe are behind Pakistan becoming, more than just this country, to be able to protect and preserve its own culture and sovereignty, but to be able to protect and serve others as well. That is the goal. Pakistan's military, though, has always been far more superior than other countries. A lot of people know that. And so the enhancement, the continuation of buying their weapons, a lot of them from China, it's to be seen whether or not they're going to buy them from the United States. But there's opportunities there for sure. But the difference is that I think over the last year, like I was saying at the beginning of this, that there's been a brand new branding of Pakistan that has completely, I think, pulled them off the rungs of the ladder, pulled them out of this box that they were in, of being known as a supporter of terrorism, etc., and seeing as now a fighter of terrorism, and to be seen as an ally, and to be seen as somebody that partners can rely on. And we saw that with those Islamabad 1.0 talks. And I say 1.0 because I'm still hopeful that Islamabad will host another round of talks there.
Yeah, that seems to be the mood there in Islamabad. I'm in Lahore, but I can tell you I share that optimism. There's many a slip between the cup and the lip. Durrani Sahib, you're a former diplomat. Laurie makes a very interesting point about diplomatic space being increased. Do diplomats feel more empowered on the back of decisive battlefield victories, or do diplomatic challenges of negotiations or building cases for the countries remain roughly the same, regardless of what the results in the wars are?
Let me also add that diplomacy never stops working, even if during the thick of the war. And this is what you have seen even now. Right now, we are seeing a period of lull, but diplomacy is working. Of course, there are setbacks, but the drafts are changing hands, coming and going between the US and Iran, and that's working. Of course, the main problem is uncertainty, and that uncertainty needs to be removed.
But there are no drafts. There are no drafts being exchanged between India and Pakistan. That's what my point is. While between US and Iran.
No, but you are referring to Iran,
no,
US.
No, I'm referring to India and Pakistan. That while Iran and US, despite all that has happened.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about America and Iran.
India and Pakistan.
But with regard to India, yes. Right now in India, there is no appetite, or at least they are portraying like that. But that is at their own peril. They know our address. From Pakistan's side, we have always been ready for a dialogue. It is up to the Indians whether they want to have a dialogue or not. But if they are ready, they know our address, yes.
They know our address. Very quickly, Dr. Flavis, if you could tell, why hasn't diplomacy worked between India and Pakistan, despite the fact that in the worst of conditions, US and Iran seem to be talking. There are back-channel engagement even between Ukraine and Russia. But this doesn't seem to be happening between India and Pakistan. What's your take?
Yeah, actually, you put two different wars or conflicts that I have fundamentally, they are very differently. Ukraine and Russia war is differently than what happened in May last year, your war with India or India war with Pakistan. The fundamental issue is that Russia is a presence or is occupying a kind of swamp of Ukraine, and they are there, and the forces and the technique and the type of methodology they use is differently that you are using within. Related to your conflict, you have almost similar. You have a similarity in the type of military equipment that you use. Also, your air fight jets are very competitive from Chinese, getting from Chinese. Now you are going to product yourself. That means you had a very good lesson learned from last year. So that capability in air fight, it's a huge one. You control the data. Managing the data control in the airspace was very vital on this case. In the case of Ukraine doesn't use any kind of air fighters, only drones, different types of drones that could see evolution in warfare in terms of drones. That is a little bit different. But in your case, the capability in precise ammunition and also drones that are is much more advanced and much more manageable. So that was the fundamental. There is a fundamental differences between two wars.
Point well made and understood. Our debate continues. We just take a little break here. This is a program break. It doesn't break the tempo of the debate, and we will offer you more insightful perspectives after we come back into the studios. Welcome back to Redline Global Special Edition. Our debate continues as our studios remain active here in Lahore, SAMAA studio, and there in Beirut, Lebanon, Sen studio. Let me take a moment to thank our panelists who were with us before the break started, Laurie Watkins, Asif Ali Durrani, and Dr. Flavis. The debate about India and Pakistan is not going to end here. We will have another insightful discussion on this from our Beirut studio. So over to you, Sahil.
Thank you so much, Talat. It was a riveting conversation that you had with your panel of experts. Last year's 4-day conflict, remember, Talat, was definitely a conflict between India and Pakistan. It was fought on the fronts, but it was fought on two fronts, rather. There was one military, of course, and the other one was digital. And on the digital battlefield, remember, Talat, the weapons were false narratives, from fake pilot captures to imaginary coups. The misinformation was sweeping. It was coordinated. And in some cases, it was deliberate. Sara Gill of the South Era Network reports from Islamabad. Take a look.
India and Pakistan's 4-day conflict last year was as much a war of military might as it was a war of false narratives. Narratives that were propelled online by prominent politicians and even mainstream broadcasters. Now, if you were in India last May, you might have come across some of these false narratives, such as India capturing a Pakistani pilot, a Karachi port on fire, and perhaps the most breaking and exclusive of them all, although completely false. Meanwhile, if you were in Pakistan last May, you might have witnessed and even experienced Pakistan lifting its ban on X. Again, none of this was true. Researchers have labeled this as both misinformation, but also deliberate disinformation to drive engagement with emotionally charged content in a bid for governments to build public support at home for the war. But perhaps most alarming was that broadcasters with huge social media followings and real influence were also spreading this misinformation. Some did apologize for their part in spreading lies, but there's something we must confront in the region, and that is the fundamental role of a journalist, which is to question, interrogate, and fact-check. Press freedom is a well-known challenge in the region, but this conflict brought in what modern warfare looks in today's age. It's fought on two fronts, one militarily and one digital. And on the digital front, the line between journalist and soldier in some cases disappeared.
Now let me bring in former senior US government official and foreign policy expert Adolfo Franco to talk more about this. Let's begin by talking about the misinformation warfare, especially in moments of heightened tension. In your opinion, how does media warfare and competing information narratives really affect diplomatic decision-making?
Well, first, thank you very much for the invitation. That was an excellent report, and unfortunately, this is not limited to the India-Pakistan conflict. This is now a global phenomena. Our president, President Trump of the United States, often refers to fake news. Now, not everything is fake news, but the problem is compounded not just by the digital ability of anyone going on and declaring themselves a journalist, which is what's happening in the digital space. But in addition to that is that journalism has become increasingly advocacy. As your report suggested, there is this line about journalistic integrity. In the United States, frankly, anyone can declare themselves a journalist. Many of the major news media in the United States, their reporters such as yourselves or anchors, are former government officials of both Democratic and Republican administrations. So to answer your question, it influences greatly. These so-called journalists are often recognized figures, popular figures, and have followings. I'm not talking about just the media use or the digital use of the platforms that exist, but the actual people who are identifying themselves as journalists have no standards, at least in the United States, other than their self-proclamation. So they become the ultimate influencers. And yes, they influence public opinion. Traditionally, the conflict, for example, in India and Pakistan, or currently in Iran with the United States, we would be accustomed to governmental propaganda. Now that has been replaced by self-declared journalists who carry this narrative on behalf of their respective sides.
Now that we have spoken about misinformation and misinformation warfare, I want to shift gears a little and ask, how has the US managed the tension between its strategic partnership with India and also its long-standing security relationship with Pakistan during periods of direct Indo-Pakistan military confrontation?
Well, it's a delicate balance. And it's been that for a number of years, but it is increasingly so for two reasons. The United States views the relationship with both countries as critical and crucial. Obviously, we know the historical animosity, suspicion, and rivalry between the two. With respect to Pakistan, that had been, of course, our traditional ally for many, many, many years. While this is during the Cold War, while India was more in the old Soviet orbit. Now that has changed dramatically for some time, and India has become more of an important partner for the U.S. regarding trade and particularly technology. And of course, there's a very large Indo-American population in the United States, which is quite affluent and influential. But beyond that, it's been seen by the United States as a global partner in countering Chinese influence, which is, of course, our number one, from the American perspective, adversary, both economically and militarily. So India has become more prominent in a global setting. At the same time, Pakistan is a key ally for our regional issues and concerns. It is a Muslim country that exerts significant influence in the Middle East, as obviously evidenced most recently by its mediation. Prime Minister Sharif, for example, has a personal and excellent relationship with President Trump. Pakistan nominated President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize award last year. And of course, it has credibility and influence with Iran and with our Arab allies, an alliance with Saudi Arabia, a military alliance. And its closeness to China is both a concern and an advantage for the U.S. to maintain good relations with Pakistan. Therefore, it is a complicated dual relationship. But the United States tries to silo the relationship to the extent that it can. It played a key role in mediating the end of the conflict between India and Pakistan, most recently in Kashmir, and I think played a favorable role from the standpoint of both countries. But it is a complicated relationship, but we see our interests to be divergent for different reasons for both countries.
Rodolfo, you're very right when you talk about striking that balance.
Yes.
You would always hear complaints either from one side or the other about that balancing act. In that sense, do you think while Washington is trying its best to do that balancing act, has that balancing act tended to favor one side in practice more than the other?
Well, certainly on the economic front, it has favored India more recently for a number of reasons that have to do largely with China. I would say more recently, it has favored Pakistan. And I say this for this reason, and this is prior to the role that Pakistan is playing now, which is crucial. The relationship between the Prime Minister and President Trump is personal and strong. You might recall that we suspended assistance to Pakistan in 2017 under President Trump's first term. And there has been a radical change in this administration. Again, I'm speaking prior to not be self-serving, prior to the current mediation role that Pakistan plays. Our biggest concern is Afghanistan and the terrorism that is taking place in Pakistan. Even the last 2 days have been terrible with two major incidents. So that is, we see Pakistan as a buffer, and we are concerned, obviously it shares a border with Iran as well. So Pakistan has been shifting to more of a priority for the United States. And there is a reason, quickly I might add, that India and the United States have had some disputes over the Russian-Iranian conflict and India's importation of Russian oil when the United States had asked that not take place. So those relationships have become strained.
Thank you so much, Adolfo Franco. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for helping our viewers make better sense of where the story is heading and how the relation between India and Pakistan is placed currently and what could happen over the next few years. Talat, as you heard, Adolfo Franco really helped us gain more sense of how the Washington is trying to strike that fine balance between maintaining its relations with India, but also with Pakistan, both very important players when it comes to South Asian geopolitically as well as economically. Back to you, Talat.
Thank you, Sahil. I was all ears listening to the frank assessment of Mr. Franco. He did drop the word Afghanistan towards the end of the conversation, and we know Afghanistan to have become the bleeding wound of South Asia, which causes problems beyond South Asian border. So the next part of our Red Line Global will look at Afghanistan from that perspective, and we will hope to have a very engaging debate all around Afghanistan's multidimensional issues, not just from Lahore, but from Beirut as well. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers from South Asia, Southwest Asia, the Middle East and beyond. You are watching Redline Global Special Edition being broadcast simultaneously from Lahore in Pakistan and in Beirut, Lebanon. Let's talk about Afghanistan. Afghanistan's perennial problems are not just a cause of concern for the neighbors, but they are also a challenge for the countries of Europe and the United States of America. In this segment, our panelists will unpack some of the mysteries of this curious land that continues to defy solution. Let me introduce the panelists who will show up in my studio here in Lahore. Scott Kelly, founder, analyst, and Water's Edge retired Army officer, is joining us from the US. Scott, thank you very much for being with us. And I'm also joined by Kathy Gannon, former long-term Afghanistan, Pakistan correspondent, who has covered Afghanistan for nearly 35 years and has done remarkable journalistic and academic work on this. Kathy, also welcome to the show. Before I dive into very complex kind of debate about Afghanistan as we see it today, let me take this opportunity to thank the teams from SEN and SAMAA, who have for the first time in Pakistan's media history joined together and expanded the horizons of the debate. And at the same time, let me at this point also toss it to Sahil in Beirut, who has his own set of panels to introduce on the same subject. Over to you, Sahil.
Thank you, Talat. Look forward to hearing your discussion with Scott and Kathy. But before we do that, to understand the fault line that Afghanistan has become, you have to understand how it got here. In 1994, if you see, the Taliban emerged from the chaos of post-Soviet civil war in Kandahar. 2 years later, they were in Kabul, declaring an Islamic emirate and erasing women from public life overnight. But it all changed at this moment. September 11, 2001. Everything changed. The United States invaded, the government collapsed, and for 20 years, the world told itself the Taliban were finished, except they were not. They regrouped, they waited, and then on August 15, 2021, Kabul fell again. The Islamic Emirate was back, and with it, a new set of fault lines between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. So much so that the region is still navigating all of them today. My colleague Shabnam Nasimi recently held a discussion with experts to dig into this very complex topic. Let's listen in.
In late February, Pakistan launched airstrikes on militant camps inside Afghanistan. Within days, the two neighbors were at open war. But the roots of this conflict go back a lot further than that. At the heart of it, a line on a map drawn under British rule more than a century ago and never accepted by Kabul.
I mean, first, the border issue will continue to be a problem. It doesn't matter whether the Taliban are in power, whether Hamid Karzai was in power. You ask any of them, that nobody will accept that as the border. And they're quite adamant about it. And if anybody does suggest it, they're attacked by all sides. It doesn't matter which side of the fence you're sitting on. So you really need to find a long-term solution. You have to settle that Durand line, which was established in 1892, and today it's still a line, into an international border and all that comes with an international border.
And the border is only part of the story. Pakistan today is fighting militants on multiple fronts, and not all of them are the Taliban.
And you have to deal with where do all these militant groups, I mean, not just the TTP. There's the TTP, the Islamic State, the Uzbekistan movement, there's the Uyghurs. It's a huge problem, and the world ignores it until it becomes, and it's a huge problem for Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they're both suffering because of these groups. And the world ignores it until it becomes, it explodes, and then they react to it.
Still, the TTP is Islamabad's biggest grievance, and it tried to talk its way out. A 2022 ceasefire with the TTP collapsed, and last October, Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia stepped in. A deal was signed in Doha, but days later, it fell apart in Istanbul. Pakistan said the Taliban kept moving the goalposts. The Taliban said they don't control the TTP. But by February, the talking was over. Pakistan launched Operation Ghazab al-Haq, Wrath for the Truth, and in March, an airstrike reportedly hit a drug rehabilitation center in Kabul. Taliban officials said that hundreds were killed, and weeks later, missiles reportedly struck a university in Kunar, hitting student accommodation and another rehab center. Pakistan denies targeting either. And then a new mediator, China, quietly pulling both sides to the table in the city of Urumqi.
In these talks, they were not as similar to the ones that have happened before in Turkey, in Qatar. There was a certain engagements in Saudi Arabia as well. But this time, there was not a big hype. It was not announced before and after. And when these talks started, that was the time we actually got to know publicly that these talks are happening. So it felt like that the Chinese were actually, what they were trying to do was actually trying to get engagement on a smaller level to be able to lay out the ground for talks to go on. Because before that, what we have seen is that whenever they have talks happened after the conflict started in October, it has always been to actually stop the conflict or to actually, there have been more firefighting. We can say. But this time it was actually an attempt to start the conversation on both sides. And for that, these talks actually, what we understood was to lay down ground for big engagement to happen afterwards.
The ceasefire is holding, but barely. Just this week, a TTP attack in Banu killed more than 15 Pakistani officers. For now, the guns have quietened. But after Doha, after Istanbul, after every promise that came before, few here believe that the peace will hold. Until the question of the TTP is answered, the fear is not whether the violence will return, it is when will it return.
What a deep dive from Shabnam Naseebi. It really helps you gain so much richer perspective about what the issue is. And look what this collaboration between South Asia Network and SAMAA is getting you. We are getting you voices from Germany, the UK, the US. So from the Asia Pacific to the Americas and Europe, we are getting a complete 360-degree perspective. And Talat, that really helps because we are not only getting into the micro aspects, but we are also in a way helping our viewers understand the macro picture of it. And I think you have guests waiting for you. And after that, I also have guests waiting from the US and London. So we'll really provide a very, very rich deep dive to our viewers. Over to you, Talat.
Look, what deep dives and 360 perspectives do to you, they also make you dizzy. That's why you need the guest to give you a sense of where your North Star is. Scott Kelly and Kathy Gannon, thank you very much for being with us today. Scott, let me start with you. How do you look at Afghanistan from where you are? How does it look to you today?
Well, Afghanistan is continuing to have governance issues due to its terrain and diverse population segment. The Taliban have been able to take control of the country and establish dominance, but they have yet to maintain territorial control. It indicates that their ability to quickly come to power in 2021 was due as much to war weariness on the part of the population who had gone through over 40 years of conflict at that point, as to any robust support for a Taliban form of government. They're continuing to struggle to form the state institutions that would allow them to integrate more closely into the international system and prevent them from being a hotbed of criminal and terrorist activity along the borders.
That's actually quite a synopsis of how Afghanistan appears. Kathy, you have been at it for a very long time. Let me ask you a question that has been on my mind. It may not have a lot of substance to it, but I still want to get a grip on thing. How is reporting in Afghanistan today different from the reporting of like yesteryears?
Yeah, first I'd like to comment on what Scott said. A great deal of the reason why the Taliban were returned to power was because of the governance over the 20 years and the lack of the police and the army in terms of not being paid. And so they're feeling committed to to the government. So there's a lot of reasons why the Taliban are back in power today, and including the way that the war was fought, both by NATO and the U.S. forces, and how their abilities were underestimated. So I just wanted to mention that in terms of having watched it over the entire course of the war and the Taliban before. As far as reporting, Talit, there's no difference between now and before. I was there when the Taliban were last in power, and I've been back a lot since the Taliban are back in power. And so reporting isn't different today than it was before. The important thing is to be able to have access to people, whether you have access to the leadership or not. And that varies. That varies both in Pakistan and in Afghanistan and elsewhere. But in terms of having access to the people, to being on the ground, that hasn't changed. The dangers are the same. The dangers are it's a difficult job to do it on the ground. It's not so difficult to watch it from a distance, but to do it on the ground today, like yesterday, it has its difficulties. But you have to, otherwise you can't tell the stories.
Yeah. The reason I asked you this question was your statement in the report that Sahil ran from Beirut, in which you spoke about the world really taking its eye off what's happening inside Afghanistan. I'm just wondering, is there enough volume of information or reportage coming out of Afghanistan that draws the world's attention to what's cooking there, number one? And number two, do you actually have access to what the Taliban thinking is? Because there are many people who are trying to decipher what the game is.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. There's a couple of reasons why there are no eyes on the ground. All the embassies are closed. The Western embassies are closed, even though more than 20 embassies are open today. U.S. intelligence and U.S. knowledge of what's going on the ground in Afghanistan in terms of the militant groups, it's done from a distance. Increasingly so as they've closed their consulate in Peshawar. So the eyes on the ground and the understanding on the ground, Talit. It's not just about having your eyes on the ground. It's understanding the dynamics. It's a country of 42 million people. And so to be able to, whether you're doing your reporting or whether you're going to be speaking or making policy decisions or trying to find a way forward for Afghanistan with Afghans, there needs to be on the ground involvement. And the refusal of the United States and Western embassies to return to Afghanistan and try to understand what is going on from places like Doha, where they have access to people who can speak English, who can get to Doha, and are largely who will say what they want to hear. That gives a distorted view. From a reporting sense, there needs to be much more on the ground. Do you have access to the Taliban? No, not always. Do you have access to some? Of course you do. At different levels, yes, of course you can find access at different levels. Do you have access to the people, Talit? Of course you do. You can travel, you can talk to a lot of people, you can get a feel for what's going on the ground and understand from a variety of perspectives what is happening on the ground. That gives you a lot of insights from the village to the cities to the towns. It's the many camps that are now in Afghanistan and are growing from the refugees coming from Pakistan. So yes, you certainly, if you're on the ground, you certainly can do strong reporting. Can you be sure that you're interpreting properly what the Taliban is thinking, or one Taliban? It's not a monolith. There are a lot of different groups within the Taliban to get a good handle on that. That's a difficult one. But of course, you can certainly give perspectives and an understanding. And that's what we do, Talit. That's our job, is to try to
That's what our job is. But let me take your point to Scott. Scott, long before Donald Trump uttered the word Greenland, or Iran came up the way it has come up now, he mentioned a word, Bagram base. And he also talked about the desire to get back the American weaponry that he says was left behind because of the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan. And he blames the former president for that. Is there really an appetite in the US and beyond USA in Europe to hear more about Afghanistan? I mean, it has been going on for such a long time. There seems to be a policy compassion and attention fatigue there.
Most of the public in the West is tired about hearing about the war in Afghanistan after 20 years and after the way that war ended, to be honest. But you do see a growing appetite to discuss engagement with Afghanistan, in policy circles particularly. The war with Iran has strained America's relationships with the Gulf states, and access to more bases in the region is seen as a long-term imperative. The opportunity to normalize relationships with the Taliban and support their state structure does provide the opportunity for America to re-access things like Bagram Air Base, which is seen as a long-term strategic asset for the United States. This is something where Trump's transactional nature actually makes him uniquely qualified to pursue a transactional opportunity.
Transactional opportunity, will that happen after the Iran deal is signed or not signed, or can it happen simultaneously to what the Trump administration is dealing with? Because that's crucial. To mark something on the chart is one thing, but to act on it is quite another.
Theoretically, they could be done in parallel, but the amount of folks that Trump trusts in his cabinet to represent him and make informed decisions appears to be shrinking drastically. It doesn't appear likely that America is going to be able to engage Afghanistan in a meaningful diplomatic way on any level while simultaneously pursuing an end to the war with Iran.
Kathy, if I were to ask you to respond to this, should the world worry what's happening inside Afghanistan? Because, again, referring to the same report that was played out of Beirut, you mentioned that the things are happening there. There are groups gathering and a network of sorts. Not your word, but I'm inferring from what you said, are coming up.
Sure.
Should the world really worry what's happening in Afghanistan at this point in time?
Yes. Yes, the short answer is yes, Talit. And the reason, and Afghans are worried, and Pakistanis are worried. And the United States, between 1996 and 2001, adopted a strategy of isolation in Afghanistan. The result, 9/11. Because there was they were blinded. And there was a lot of activity they're aware of. And a lot of activity that those among the Taliban weren't even able to control or themselves were aware of, parts of the Taliban. So yes, there's a tremendous amount happening in Afghanistan that also worries Afghans and worries Pakistanis. And isolating the Taliban rather, isolates the 42 million people in Afghanistan. And to be very clear, of all the embassies that are in Afghanistan today, none of them but Russia accepts and recognizes the Taliban. None of them. International law, however, does say that any government that has control of over 80 or 90% of its territory is in fact the de facto government, whether you choose to recognize it or you choose not to. So being inside Afghanistan has just a host of benefits in terms of access to people, on-the-ground knowledge, travel, able to get a feel for what is going on, get to interact. To be very clear, the United States doesn't even interact with the Taliban from Doha. I mean, there is the intelligence, of course, the occasional forays, but there is a ruling that does not allow them to interact with them. If you can't talk to people that you're having disagreements with, what can you talk about? And in terms of Bagram, to negotiate Bagram with the Taliban know how to negotiate. People have to remember, they negotiated that deal last time Trump was in power. And that was those who were involved in the negotiations, including SAMAA Khalilzad, was very clear when he said the Taliban would come in with files this high, filled with papers and things they wanted to ask and demand. And so they're not pushovers in terms of negotiation. So it would be well to understand who they are and to get back into Afghanistan, because according to UN reports, Talit, and you could say, well, that's members contributing, but nonetheless, there's a cacophony, a whole constellation of militant groups inside Afghanistan, whether it's the Islamic State, the Al-Qaeda in the Asian subcontinent, the Open of Uzbekistan, the Turkestan, the Uyghurs, and a lot of smaller groups, including some of the Iranian groups, Jandula, the new group that has replaced Jandula, and a number of smaller groups that are also there. And also, of course, they're also in, some of those are also in Pakistan. So there is a lot of really good, smart reasons why the United States and other Western countries do not follow the same failed strategy that the U.S. followed between 1996 and 2001 when the Taliban were last in power.
Thank you very much, Kathy. This is very, very useful, this debate, and Scott Kelly for your insightful and incisive comments. We take a break here. The topic is still on. After the break, I'm going to take you to Beirut in Lebanon, where Sahil is ready with his panelists, and I think a report as well on the same subject. Welcome to Redline Global's special edition. Welcome to viewers from the Middle East, South Asia, Southwest Asia, and elsewhere in the world. Two of our studios are live, and we are talking about Afghanistan. Just to give you a sense of how important this issue is for Pakistan, in the last nearly 11 months, there have been almost 900 attacks, terrorist attacks inside Pakistani territory. Nearly 95% of them emanated from Afghanistan. The rest of the 5% had the support of the groups inside Afghanistan. In terms of how many terrorists were killed, about 1,400 terrorists were knocked out. Equal number of civilians and military and police personnel have lost their lives. So there is a headache that Pakistan is dealing with. Policy parameters have changed. It's a no-nonsense policy. Red lines are clearly drawn. But it's not just a headache and a challenge for Pakistan. It's a challenge that goes beyond Afghanistan. You heard Kathy Gannon talk about the world taking its eye off Afghanistan and the consequences of that failed policy. Let me now take you to Lebanon, where Sahil is ready with his panelists and a report as well. Over to you, Sahil.
Thank you, Talat. And it was a spellbinding conversation between you, Scott, and Kathy, especially when Kathy mentioned about how we all should be worried. It's not just Pakistan or Afghanistan or India or South Asia for that matter, but the whole world as a whole. Now let's bring in Giorgio Safiero, CEO at Gulf State Analytics. He's joining me from Washington. And we also have Withering Fellow in International Relations and Security from the University of Loughborough, Afzal Ashraf, who joins me from London. Let's begin by discussing what's happening when it comes to isolation. In our previous discussion, we did hear Kathy Gannon pointing out that isolating Kabul or isolating Taliban is not just isolating Taliban, but also 45 million people of Afghanistan. So in this international isolation of Taliban, is this punishing the regime or is this punishing the Afghan people? And does anyone have a better answer? First, we'll begin with you, Giorgio.
Thank you so much. Really wonderful to be on your program. I think that today, in 2026, when we talk about the quote-unquote isolation of the Taliban government in Kabul, we need to understand that the isolation is very relative. Yes, it's true that there's only one state in the entire world, Russia, which formally recognizes the Taliban. But in practice, what we see are really all the countries in the immediate neighborhood engaging the Taliban one way or another. The Central Asian republics, especially Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, they have not formally recognized the Taliban like Russia has, but they have very deep ties with the Taliban and they engage Kabul very closely. The same can be said about China and the Taliban, Iran and the Taliban, GCC countries, especially the UAE and the Taliban. So I would just push back on this idea that the Taliban is isolated globally right now.
So when we talk about international isolation, we also talk about sanctions, we talk about the lack of embassies, and I think in that context, what you're saying makes sense. And also, I'm just again recalling what Kathy said, because that really left an indelible mark. Because if you isolate a regime, how do you decide whether it's the regime being isolated or the population? Something that we've also seen happening in other countries such as Iran. Now, the Taliban present a united front publicly, but there are known fault lines between pragmatists who want international recognition and hardliners who answer literally to no one. Now, how deep are those divisions, and is there any scenario of Zil where they become impossible to contain?
Well, it's an important question that you ask, and I'm afraid there's no really easy answer to this. The problem with isolation, as has been described, I think, very well, is that it's there in an official capacity. The sanctions that you highlighted are critical. So while it's true that a lot of states do contact with the Taliban, certainly at an operational, at an economic level, it is difficult to develop the country because of sanctions. And those sanctions primarily enforced by the Taliban regime, that not only is aid not allowed, but many of the funds the Taliban or Afghanistan entitled to were friend and died to others. What we have is a problem that exists in international relations that's magnified in the Gulf of Afghanistan is a problem where international relations, the relationship between states, real and it therefore amoral. It has a moral component, but the society at large within the United States in general and elsewhere, it cares about people, it cares about morality. And so we have sanctioned the regime which knowingly hurt the public. And there's no state level initiative to try and overcome the inherent injustice in this system. The assumption that the American government and other Western governments will make that either the public, the Afghan public, should rise up and replace the regime, which of course is impractical, or that the regime is therefore responsible for the suffering of its own people, regardless of the fact that those sanctions have been put on them by these states. So there is no or optimistic prospect of this situation getting better. If anything, it's likely to get worse with the Pakistani policies and to some degree the Iranian policies of repatriation of Afghan refugees who are adding to the burden economically as well as in other ways on the Taliban regime.
Afzal, I'll request you to stay on with us, and I want to ask this question to both you, Giorgio, as well as to you, Afzal, about India, because how can we not discuss of India when we are discussing Afghanistan? Because India, as we know, traditionally has had huge influence in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is an important player when it comes to geopolitics, and India lost significant influence in Afghanistan when the Taliban, remember, took over in 2021. It had invested heavily in the previous government. Now, 4 years later, is India finding a way back in? And what does it have to offer to the Taliban that Pakistan cannot?
Yeah, it's certainly a confusing story that has evolved in so many ways over the years. Obviously, we all know that for a long time, the Indian government was very opposed to the Taliban, and Afghanistan was sort of a theater for the India-Pakistan rivalry to play out, with India giving a lot of support to the government that was backed by the United States back during the years in which the Taliban was in its insurgency phase. And the concern among Indian policymakers was that if the Taliban would come back to power, it would make Afghanistan a country that could give Pakistan strategic depth at the expense of India's perceived security interests. But India, however, has been able to take advantage of the very serious tensions between Islamabad and Kabul that have heated up since 2022. Now it seems to be that Pakistan is concerned about a Taliban-India partnership growing. Concern is that on northern and southern borders, Pakistan has countries that are hostile to Pakistan and are working together to surround Pakistan. So this is obviously a huge concern for policymakers in Islamabad. But more to get to your question, I think India's interests in post-occupation Afghanistan are not exclusively geared toward countering Pakistan. I think from the Indian perspective, Afghanistan represents sort of a gateway into Central Asia. And this is very important for India's long-term energy, economic, and geopolitical interests.
Thank you so much, Giorgio Zafiero, as well as to Afzal Ashraf. It was an enthralling conversation, helped us gain much perspective on where exactly Afghanistan is, how is India now trying to find its place back in Afghanistan. But all of this discussion is happening because we have been talking about conflict. And the ongoing conflict is between Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's where I have Talat joining us live from SAMAA Global. That's why we are having this simulcast, because in the region, we have all of these conflicts going on, Talat. It's been one after another. That's clearly not been great for the region. But in your assessment, if we focus on today's discussion, if we focus on the simulcast, if we have to sum it up for our viewers, for me, what really stood out was what Kathy said, that it should worry us all, these conflicts. It shouldn't just be about Pakistan being worried about what's happening in Afghanistan, India being worried about what's happening with its borders, but the world as a whole. I think it applies universally. Also, what it stood out for me is when you were having that discussion with Scott, and earlier on India, Pakistan, is also everyone in a united note saying that we all need to sort of rise above these conflicts because the world really cannot afford them. What's your sense? What did you pick up from today's conversation?
Look, I picked up exactly what you picked up, but at the same time, I have a degree in IR, and I sort of style myself as a realist, and journalism from the ground actually reinforce that realism in you. That doesn't mean that you should lose touch with the people's concerns. But remember also, yes, it is about repatriation, for instance, is about people. Isolating governments in the name of strategy is also hurting the people. But Sahil, wars are also about people. Terrorism is also about people. Economy is getting destroyed by strange regimes is also about people. As I was talking to you, I was looking at Mansoor Niazi and Imran Danish, two of our colleagues from Tolo News who have been detained by Taliban as Tolo News offices were raided. So, it depends on the power politics impacting people. So, yes, wars should not be there, but they are there. You have to cover them, analyze them. Conflict shouldn't be there. We have to rise above conflicts and be more sane about resorting to better civilized ways of venting our anger and addressing our issues, but that's not happening. So, my takeaway really is that it's an unfolding situation. We are not really at the cusp of something extraordinary, but the way things are happening all around you and me, from where you are, from where I am, and the world beyond that, it looks that so many bombs are exploding all around that makes it a truly unique turning point in our history, and that's exactly what we're trying to capture here. Again, kudos to your team for pulling it off, and my total compliments to my team here as well for doing it for the first time in Pakistan's media history, when you have seen perspectives from all around, to use your word, 360-degree view of conflicts that are only seen sometimes from the keyholes of national policies. So we will continue this debate. It has been certainly an insightful session. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye for now.